So people attribute success to luck, right? If only 95% of the companies, well, if 95% of the companies fail, and even the few that do succeed, like the 5%, many of them will make very small exits, right? Maybe a few million, maybe tens of millions, hardly ever cross 100 million. To be a unicorn, which is defined to be a company that has a market capitalization of at least $1 billion, um, that's a very, very small fraction typically, right? And so people attribute success to luck, right? If it's a roll of dice. But then, it's also been observed that some people tend to be repeatedly lucky. And so the question becomes why? Well, my contention is that these people, they understand this journey, they plan for it, and then they go execute, right? They execute that plan. And my contention is that the probability of success can be significantly improved if you follow if you know and follow these three things. Um, so that is, going to be the main outline of this presentation. So we're going to talk about understanding this journey. We're going to plan it, and we are going to execute the plan. All right. All right. So let's begin. So we're going to talk about the first the first part of this presentation, which is all about understanding the journey. Now, I will spend most of my time, um, in the first section, understanding the journey. Some of it in planning and very little in execution, which is actually the opposite. You would think I would do the reverse, but the reality is, if you lay out the blueprint well, if you understand this journey well, and if you plan for it well, then execution just becomes a matter of executing that blueprint, right? So that's the reason I'm going to spend more time on the first two sections than on the last section, right? So let's begin by understanding this journey. So the first question is, why even start a company, right? And many entrepreneurs come to me for advice, and it's amazing that many entrepreneurs are even confused about that part. So let's try to answer that in this slide. So on the left, we show the world that exists before the company is formed. On the right, we have the world with the company in it, and the job of the company is to take the world from the left to the right, right? So said another way, the job of the company is to improve the world in some way. So by the way, I'm talking about innovative companies. That's the kind of companies I do, companies that bring something new to the world. There are other kinds of companies. There are companies that are, they provide some sort of a service that is very similar to what other companies already do, or there are companies that just replicate what other companies have done. I'm not talking about those kind of companies. I'm mainly talking about companies that improve the world in some way, right? That take the world from the left to the right. So let's take some examples. The job of the company is to elevate the world in some way, right? So let's take some examples. Before Google came into the world, it was very hard to search for information on the internet, and Google improved the world by making search really easy. When before Apple came into the world, the consumer devices were ugly, they were hard to use, and Apple showed us how to improve that. So that's the job of a company, and what it takes to go from the left to the right is vision plus execution. Right? So vision is the big idea that the company has, and execution is, well, the execution or implementation of that idea. So that sounds very easy, right? You can have a big idea and you can execute on that and sort of improve the world. So then why do so many companies fail? So let's go through some reasons why companies fail. So number one, look, funding is very difficult, right? Uh, most entrepreneurs, they're not born rich, so to say. They don't have enough money to take the company from the start to finish until it becomes profitable. Anyway, building a big company, profitability takes lots of years, 5-10 years before the company becomes profitable. So you have to go raise from what are called venture capitalists. And a typical venture capitalist, right? There are, you guys probably know, a venture capitalist or a VC firm, they're in the business of lending money to startups. And any given VC firm, they have a number of venture partners, people in the venture firm. Any one given partner goes through 1,000 presentations in 1 year from entrepreneurs, and they select a handful, right? Maybe at 5 on average, 5 per year, not more than that. So with those low odds, funding is very difficult. They may not be able to raise funding at all. Right? So that's number one. The second problem is the vision might be too big. If your vision is too big, it might take too long to build the product. And even if you raise money, nobody gives you money or sufficient money to take you from start to finish. Funding might run out along the way. You usually raise money in a series of funding raises, right? So you may raise a few million at the beginning, or maybe even less than $1 million, and then in the second round you raise a little bit more as you show progress, and then a little bit more, and so on and so forth. And if you can show enough progress towards completing your product and starting to sell it, a venture capitalist might say, well, they've sunk some money in the company. It's better that they not put more money behind bad money and put it elsewhere, right? So the funding might run out along the way. If the vision is too grand, that's the problem. On the flip side, if the vision is too small, it's also a problem, because competitors might find it easy to copy the product, right? So that's very hard, right? So you had a great idea, you build the product, but and it initially might sell like hotcakes, but then the competitors start copying it, and you have nowhere to go. So you can see that this is a very difficult proposition. If the vision is too grand, it's a problem. If the vision is too small, it's a problem. Then the question becomes, how the heck are we supposed to do companies, right? Well, I will show you in my future slides that I prefer if the vision is grand, is big, but there is a way to navigate that, which I'll show you in my future slides. But anyway, to talk about more problems, another one is that the market reception may not be good. So you did this company, right, thinking that the product will sell and people will buy, but when it became time to sell the product, you're not going to be able to sell the product on day one. You probably take some time, maybe a couple of years to build the product, and then by the time you build it and try to sell it, you get no reception. So these are just some of the problems that happen, because of which the companies die, and there are, of course, other problems. So our job is to, in this presentation, navigate how we can prevent some of this from happening and sort of increase the probability of success, right? So my contention is that life is about probabilities. It's never a 0 or a 1, and the same holds for doing a startup or a company and making it successful. It's not a 0, it's not a 1. Our job is to move the dial a little bit closer to the 1, right? And therefore have a better chance of making a successful company, perhaps a unicorn. And that's what this presentation is about. So moving on to the next step in understanding. So I'm going to talk about this this chart. It's called the technology adoption life cycle. It was introduced by a gentleman called Jeffrey Moore in his book that came out in the in the early 90s. It's called crossing the chasm, right? I believe this chart is still very applicable pretty much to every company that gets started. So let's talk about this, right? So this is the first part of our understanding. So on the x-axis, we have time going from left to right. The time starts when the company becomes ready to launch its product, or becomes ready to sell its product, right? Not when the company is formed. So the start is when the company goes out in the market and raises its hand, okay, I'm willing to sell the product. On the y-axis, we have the acceleration of adoption of the company's product. So over time, of course, the markets uptake the company's product, right? That's basically a simple graph. Now you'll see different colors in the graph, and the different colors correspond to different psychological profiles of customers adopting the company's product. So let's talk about them at a high level. So the very first people who start adopting the product when you start selling it, these are the orange guys. I'm just going to call them early adopters for the purpose of this presentation. But Geoffrey Moore, the author of this graph, he makes a distinction between innovators and early adopters, right? For the purpose of this presentation, we're just going to refer to them as early adopters or the orange guys, right? Now, their psyche, their psychological profile is that they are not particularly, interested in a product that has polish, that provides them with all the 10,000 features that a old legacy product might have. They are the kind of people who would stand in a line when a new product comes out, right? In a consumer store, maybe when the Apple came out with a new iPhone or another, like Apple Watch or something. So they want to tinker with technology, right? Or they are the kind that just want to help you, right? When I did my companies, the early adopters were guys who just wanted to help an entrepreneur. Hey, you're an entrepreneur. I know how hard it is to build companies. I'd love to help you, right? And be part of my success. They might be friends of friends or friends of your venture capitalist, or maybe an advisor, right? Or they might be people who understand the risks of being early adopters of a product, but they also understand that if the product succeeds, they will get a jump start on their competition. And the competition might be inside their firm, whoever they work for, or the competition might be external to that firm, right? Competitive company. So this is the psyche of the early adopters, right? Now, sometimes startup founders, they find success selling to some early adopters, and they're like, wow, this company is going to be unicorn. And the answer is no. The early adopters are not the ones that make the company a unicorn. It's actually the blue guys that will eventually determine if the company becomes a unicorn or not. So let's talk about the psychological profile of the blue guys. They're called by Geoffrey Moore as the early majority. So the early majority guys are the people who would normally not buy from a startup. All right. They will normally not buy a product that doesn't have the right polish, the right number of features, right? That sort of stuff. They're used to buying from polished companies that have been around for a while. They're not tinkerers of very new technology. The only reason they would buy from a relatively young company is because, and I want to say this in double quotes, it's because they have a pain. They have a pain that no other company can solve, right? That's very important. I'll talk about that multiple times during this presentation. The early majority guys have a pain that no other company can solve. And that's the only reason they would look at startups to buying a new for the purpose of buying a new product. But since they're used to buying products from startups, I'm sorry, from polished companies, they will give a lot of trouble or friction to the young company before they will actually part with their money, right? And that's why this chasm exists between the orange guys and the blue guys. So they will put the company through the ringer, right? And many startups sort of die trying to cross the chasm. They're never able to land in the blue zone successfully. And that so metaphorically speaking, they try to make the jump across the chasm and die trying to make that jump. They'll fall somewhere in the middle. Anyhow, let's talk about these two things drawn in the blue zone, the bowling alley and the tornado. So what happens when you go to the bowling alley? I'm sure many people in the audience have gone bowling. When you throw the ball hits a pin, right? And the pin falls, and the pin further takes down other balls. It's not just the ball that takes down the pins, it's also the falling pins that hit other pins and take down other. So that's why it's called the bowling alley. In this case, when you try to close the first blue customer, they will give you a lot of trouble. But when they fall, when they are satisfied, probably 5 other customers are satisfied, right? But then you go to the 6th customer, and they probably have some different requirements, and so you go through the trouble again to satisfy them. And when they become satisfied, maybe 10 other customers are satisfied, and so you can close 10 other deals without any problem. And once you close a threshold number of customers in the blue zone, suddenly magic would start, and you'll grow. You'll start growing phenomenally. This is called the tornado effect, right? Different people have different names for that. Some people call it the hockey stick effect, right? Some people call it product market fit. This is when quarter after quarter, there is no stopping you. Every quarter, your growth is phenomenal. This is when companies start getting noticed. They start appearing in news articles. And believe me, all the famous companies like Google and Netflix, and they all went through this. It's just that we found out about them when they were riding that tornado, and that includes my companies, Nutanix and Cohesity. I know how painful it was when they were trying to cross the chasm, but then the magic started happening, and they started riding the tornado, and it became fun. Let's quickly talk about the other phases in this. So the green zones, so to say. The first one is called the late majority. The psychological profile of these customers is that they would not buy from a startup no matter what, right? Even if they have a pain, they will not buy. The only reason to buy is when they see enough of the blue guys buying, right? So they don't want to be left behind, and they feel comfortable that since enough of the blue guys have bought, they feel comfortable that they can now buy the product. And finally, we have the laggards on the extreme right. These are people, you can define them as they're the kind who will buy a digital phone when no rotary phones are left. So when there is no alternative, right, then they'll start buying. So the green guys are a little bit less important in the first few phases of the company for a startup. It's really the orange guys and the blue guys that are relevant to a startup. And I would say the following: it's the blue guys that make the company a unicorn. So always strategically, we are targeting the blue guys. From inception of the company, we're going to target the blue guys, even if we know that we will be selling to the orange guys, right? So this is the first piece of understanding I like to impart to you guys. We're always targeting the early majority, and the early majority is identified by the fact that they have a pain that no other existing big company can solve. All right. Let's move on next to our understanding to the sales cycle, right? This is the cycle that a person in the company that sells the product is going to see. So the sales cycles starts with a vision, right? A deck of slides. Basically, this is an idea. Now that idea has to reach the prospective customer somehow. So that's where marketing plays a role. So marketing's job is to take that idea, what the company does, to the customer. And once the customer sees it, they're like, oh, this company can solve my pain. Remember, we are potentially targeting always the blue guys. So you the customer sees something relevant that they like. So, but they're not going to buy. They don't trust you, right? You're a startup. You have no history. You don't have a brand. So they will put you through a customer trial, or what is called a POC, proof of concept. And they're going to test for two things. One is check boxes, right? And what is a checkbox? You're selling a product that has many similar features as a lot of other products, but it has some new features, some new things that it can do that solves a pain that the customer has. So the similar features are checkboxes, right? When Google came out with search, well, it was a search engine that could provide search, but the uniqueness was that it could search and provide much more relevant information. So from the perspective of the fact that it was still a search engine was the checkbox, right? Is it fast or is it too slow? Does it give lots of results? So those are the checkboxes, right? But the pain is the new thing the product solves. So in Google's case, for instance, it was relevant search results. And the customer is going to test for both of them. They're not going to buy the product until it meets the checkboxes and it addresses the pain. Remember, this is a blue customer that we're targeting, and these guys will only buy if you're solving a pain, right? And once those two things happen, they will buy the product, or sale will happen. And the job of the company is to, in the initial phases, is to remove friction out of this sales cycle. So for instance, if you're not getting to a customer trial, the friction is probably in the vision or in the marketing of the vision, right? If it's in the idea itself, or it's in the way the idea is being marketed to the customers. Or if the sale is not happening, then either you're not meeting all the check boxes, or you're not really addressing a pain, right? A pain is defined to be something that can be solved by only aspirin, not a vitamin, right? A vitamin is good to have. An aspirin is a must-have when you have pain, or choose your favorite headache medicine, right? So that's how pains should be, that they need a solution for that right now, and not something in 6 months or 1 year or what have you, right? That's a vitamin. Vitamins can be postponed. Pain cannot be postponed. Remedy for pain cannot be postponed, right? So our job in the initial phases is to get the friction out of this sales cycle. This is what a typical sales guy would see. Now in this presentation, I'm talking about enterprise sales, where you literally sell a product to a customer. Now there are other kinds of companies that sell eyeballs, right? These are companies like Facebook, even Google kind of falls in that. It's the number of eyeballs, and eventually money is made if you sell enough eyeballs. While I'm going to focus on selling a product. The same principle applies to eyeballs, right? I gave an example of Google, where again you go through checkboxes and pain points. So the same principles apply to companies that work more on eyeballs rather than actually selling a product. But in this presentation, I'm going to use actually selling a product, because I'm going to take examples of my two companies later on, Nutanix and Cohesity, right? So we've spoken about the technology adoption lifecycle. We've spoken about the sales cycle. Let's talk about the next step in our understanding, which is the notion of a minimum viable product. So remember, I said earlier that your vision ought to be grand, your vision ought to be big. And the reason for that is if the vision is too small, it's too easy to copy, right? If it takes like a couple of months for someone to copy your vision, then you can go nowhere. So for that reason, the vision ought to be grand, but then the risk you run is that you may run out of money. So how do we navigate that, right? The MVP, the minimum viable product, is a way to navigate having a big vision and not running out of money somewhere in the middle. So what you do is you identify a subset of the vision and you call that your minimum viable product. The requirement is that since we are always trying to target the blue guys, this subset of the vision should also address some pain points, right? And it should address the early majority. So it still targets the early majority. So what you're going to do is so let's pretend that we are starting a company, right? So you've identified, you have your grand idea that the company should do. You take a subset of that and you say, this is my minimum viable product. And then you start kind of building the product, right? It's going to take us time, but you don't stop taking feedback from customers. You take feedback from customers before building the product, but also while building the product, right? You want to make sure that the pain points don't move, that they move because the markets have changed or somebody else came out with a similar idea earlier than you. So you're continuously taking feedback from customers. And eventually you're going to announce the general availability of your product. You're going to raise your hand and say that that your product is sellable. And so you go to the market with the general availability of the minimum viable product. So you tell the world, hey, I'm ready to sell the product now. So this way, by defining the MVP to be a subset of the product, you make it very tractable. You still have the large part of the vision to execute on, but at least you've gone to market with the subset of the product and shown some progress to venture capitalists. And that way, they feel confident that since you're showing them progress, they can keep giving you money, right? So this is the reason why we go out with a MVP, minimum viable product. But let me ask you this: just because we have an MVP, a minimum viable product, the V of the product, viable, means that the early majority should buy it. But before you actually try to sell, it's not really viable, right? You don't know whether it's viable. For all you know, by the time you build the product, the MVP might take you a couple of years, and then you try to sell it, people may not buy. So how do you know it's viable, and how do you deal with that? So this slide kind of talks about that aspect. So again, this slide talks about the early phases of the company, described a little bit differently. So we start with a phase where you only have the vision, the deck of slides, just the idea. And initially, so you'll identify, like I said in my last slide, you will identify what the MVP is, right? Minimum viable product, and you'll start building it. And it'll take you some time, maybe a couple of years to do that, or at least a couple of months. And so the first phase that you reach after building the MVP is what I am going to call an unqualified MVP phase. It's unqualified because nobody has yet bought the product. You don't really know whether it's truly viable or not. So then you try to sell the product and you're going to encounter some friction. Maybe some early adopters will buy, but eventually, remember, our goal is to sell to the early majority. And they will give you friction, like I said, right? So you will, in that time, refine the MVP, right? So you will take their feedback and you will continuously refine the product. And then you reach a stage where you're repeatably selling the product, right? And that is a phase that I'm going to call a repeatably sellable MVP phase. And once you reach that phase, the next part of the company is to press on the gas and generate lots of revenue, right? And the graphs I've been trying to show to you are all related to each other, right? Um, you're trying to cross the chasm. You have not crossed the chasm until you have reached the repeatably sellable MVP phase. And your job, the job of the company, until you reach that phase, is to conserve capital, to be stingy with your money. But once you reach that phase, it's a mistake to be stingy with your money. You have to now take over the market, because once it repeatably sells, the idea is known to the world, and they will try to copy. The large companies will try to copy, right? So you have to be quick to take over the market. So going from the repeatably sellable MVP phase to the revenue, generating the revenue, you got to press on the gas. So be stingy earlier on, but later on you completely change gears and start making revenue. And in the middle, while you're refining the MVP is when you're trying to cross the chasm, right? So these are the early phases of the company and how they operate. So I said, by the way, most companies die because they just run out of money. 95% of the companies that don't succeed are of that kind. They just run out of money. Now there are 5% of the companies that die because of some dispute, some lawsuit, and that sort of stuff. But most companies just flat out run out of money. So it's very important to understand how funding works. Like I said, nobody gives you all the money on day one. So this slide kind of talks about that. You start with a vision, a deck of slides, an idea, and the first money that you raise is called seed money. So the job of seed money, and a good seed, it varies from company to company, but approximately it's about $1 million. The job of a seed is to take you from the vision to a prototype. Right? This is a proof of concept. This is not something that's sellable, but it cannot demonstrates to the venture capitalists or VCs that you can make some progress building the product, and it kind of provides them with some proof on how the product is going to look like. So maybe you build a nice GUI, maybe you build some aspect of the product that shows how fast it is or how cheap it's going to be to make, although it's not polished, it's not ready yet to be sold to a customer. So that's seed money. And again, ranges from company to company. I've seen seeds that are a few $100,000. I've seen seeds that can be in multiple millions of dollars, but typically on average, it's about $1 million. And once you've shown going from, vision to prototype, then you raise your first big round of money called Series A. A good Series A is about $8 million, right? And the job of a Series A is to take you from that prototype to the unqualified MVP phase, which corresponds to you're raising the hand and saying, I'm willing to sell the product now. My product is complete. That's unqualified MVP. Even though people may not actually buy, but at least you think you're ready to sell, right? That's an unqualified MVP phase. And so between the seed and the Series A, you're building the MVP. And then you raise your next round of money called Series B. And that, again, you raise larger and larger rounds. So Series B is about $20 million. And that takes you from unqualified MVP to a repeatably selling MVP phase. So that the job of Series B is to refine the product. And once you're repeatably sellable, by the way, the definition that I have for repeatability, and so is that an average sales guy can sell to an average customer without involving people in the headquarters, without involving the founders and so on and so forth, right? If you can do that, you've reached repeatability, because now you can hire more and more sales guys and sell to more and more customers. So it doesn't have to be a very elite sales guy. It doesn't have to be a very elite customer to understand your product. An average sales guy should be able to sell to an average customer without the involvement of all the smart people in headquarters. That's repeatability, right? And when you reach that, you've reached the repeatably sellable MVP phase, right? The product doesn't have any friction. And like I said, once you reach that, you now press on the gas. So you raise more money. You're still probably not profitable. You raise more money to start the tornado. and any subsequent rounds, people sometimes raise D, E, F, G, and even if they go public, file for an IPO, that's just a funding round, right? The difference is, rather than raising money from VCs, you're raising from the general public out there. So you start the tornado and beyond. So this is how funding matches to development of the product. Now, is this always the way people, the companies follow the funding rounds? No, there is variability, but I can tell you, if they're not kind of sticking to this way of doing things, they're probably in pain, unless they're a phenomenal company and they just raise one round and they can go all the way, which is very unlikely. Most companies follow this trajectory, but if they are not able to make the progress, so if you are trying to raise a Series B and you have not even finished developing your MVP, you are going to face friction raising your Series B. VCs are going to question whether they're throwing bad money behind good money and that sort of stuff, right? But this is how good companies execute. All right. So this presentation is mostly about the early phases of the company. This is the only slide I have that talks about the later phases. So let's talk about that. Sales is going to start selling what's on the truck, which is the MVP. Engineering is going to build further on the vision. Remember, MVP is just a subset of the vision. So engineering is going to enhance the current product and keep building. So this is how there is continuous innovation. So sales sells what's on the truck, and engineering keeps putting more on the truck. And by the way, this is how you frustrate your big competitors, even if they try to copy you, right? So I'm trying to answer one of the questions: what if the competitors copy you? Well, this is how. By the time they copy what you have on the truck, you have put more on the truck, and you're constantly ahead of your competitors. This is how Google. I was at Google for 5 years. This is how Google beat Microsoft and Yahoo in competition. By the time Yahoo and Microsoft will copy what Google have, they would be 5 steps ahead because they had a much bigger vision. And eventually they both gave up. They said, Google is unbeatable. Let's throw more money on trying to build a competing search, right? So that's what engineering does. And marketing is always marketing what's on the truck, but also the bigger vision, right? They're always doing both. They're not just marketing what's on the truck. They're always educating the market on that bigger vision. Okay, so this is how the later phases always work. So to recap, we learned the technology adoption life cycle, we learned the sales cycle, we learned about the notion of a minimum viable product, we learned about the early phases of the company, and we learned about the funding steps, and finally, a little bit about the later phases, right? So that's a recap. Now let's move on to the next phase, which is planning the journey, right? So again, we're going to quickly lay out the blueprint of a company, and then the last phase would be executing the plan. So let's talk about planning. So look, you have an idea, you want to plan to build the company, but there are multiple questions to be asked as part of planning, right? Can you really truly build a company around it, right? Or is it just a project within a company? Many people come to me for advice, and they often bring me ideas that are a great project within a company, right? It'll enhance an existing company in a lot of ways, in good ways, but it may not be a company by itself, right? They're sitting in a company like VMware thinking that maybe they should, rather than doing a project in the company, they'll go out and do a company on that idea, but it may be a perfectly viable project within VMware, but not a company by itself. So how do you tell that? How do you make sure that you strike oil? Like I said, a typical venture partner goes through 1,000 presentations. How do you make sure you strike oil in the very first go? Because they don't have time beyond the first one. If they're disinterested on the first one, they likely may not even see it the second time, right? How do you strike oil in the first one? Can you build a sustainable business, right? Long term, can you protect it from competitors? So all these are some of the questions that we need to answer in the planning phase. So what I've done for brevity, is I have come up with the 10 filters, if you may, and I'll quickly walk you down these filters. Um, and these filters are so important that even if one of the filters is a red, not a green, I ask the entrepreneur to work hard to convert it at least to a partial green, if not a full green. But if more than one filter is in the red, then I tell them that, look, I don't think this ever will be a unicorn. Maybe it'll be a smaller company, and if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But I don't think this can be a unicorn, right? So this is how important these filters are. So let's go through them. Number one, how big is the truly addressable market, right? And the answer is it should be greater than $5 billion. Why? Um, because venture capitalists do not like to invest in small markets. If the market is, let's say, $200 million, and there are potentially 10 companies operating in that market, every company is going to do about $10 million in revenue or so, right? Well, that's not enough to build a unicorn, right? If you're lucky, you'll generate $20 million in that market, still not enough to build a unicorn, right? And so the VCs will not even fund you if your market is too small. Your market ought to be larger than at least $5 billion. And taking examples from my two companies, Nutanix, my first company, they brought hyperconvergence into the market. So basically, they built a platform where they brought compute and storage to live on the same platform, and you can host virtual machines on that platform easily. That was easily a few $1 billion to start with, and it was a growing market. So that filter was a pass for us. So did my company Cohesity, which started by disrupting the backup market, but then went on to the bigger vision of disrupting the data security and data management market. It was easily a $20 billion market. So that filter was a pass for us. Next filter is, how's the neighborhood? Um, how are companies that have done similar things? Are they healthy, or are they making small exits, or even dying? VCs do not want to invest in graveyards. They want to invest in a healthy neighborhood, right? If there are lots of companies dying, they're not going to invest. So, for instance, Google might have been widely successful, and Google went IPO in 2004, but there are a lot of copycats that happened, and one by one, each of them died. So by 2007, if you walk into a VC trying to raise money for a search startup, they would probably refuse because they don't want to invest in graveyards, right? That's an example. The third filter is that, how long does it take to build an unqualified MVP? And remember that we have to build the unqualified MVP uh, before our Series A funds, exhaust themselves. So you have to sort of look forward during planning. You have to estimate um, how much time it's going to take to build the product, how many engineers you want to hire, how many quality assurance people, everyone you need to build the product, and estimate how long it's going to take you, and estimate whether that's going to be enough um, for the Series A funds to not run out. So hindsight is 2020, but looking forward, you have to make that estimation, um, and only then this filter will be in the green. So I estimated, for instance, at Nutanix, that we, between our series seed and Series A, we raised $13 million. I estimated it'll take us no more than $8 million to build that an unqualified MVP, and it'll take us about 2 years. And in reality, it took us $4 million, right? So this filter was a pass. But you have to do this looking forward, not in hindsight, for the planning. Next filter is, does the MVP address a clear pain? Remember, we are always trying to target the early majority. And the pain needs to be preferably immediate. Like I said, you need an aspirin, not a vitamin, right? In my former company, for instance, Nutanix's case, the pain was that without Nutanix, people had to buy compute from one vendor, right? Any of the companies that sell, servers. Then you have to buy storage from another vendor. You have to put some network gear to connect the two, and then you could build infrastructure on which to host virtual machines. And Nutanix came and it collapsed, them, and now you can run virtual machines much easier. You don't have to go to 3 different vendors. It was much cheaper, and a variety of other benefits. So we were addressing a very clear pain. So this filter was a pass for us at Nutanix. The same thing goes for Cohesity. We collapsed. Cohesity entered by selling into the backup pane. Right, we made the backups, enterprise backups, much simpler. And before going, before us, you had to go buy backup software from one vendor, storage from another one, then some expensive hardware on which to run the backup software from yet another one. It was a total mess, and we gave them something very simple. So there was a very clear pain. So this filter was a pass for us. Another one is, are you in line with the industry trends? Right, because my strong recommendation is not to swim upstream, not to go against the trends. If you go against the trends, the world is working against you. If you are with the trends, the world is working for you. Right, better not swim upstream. In the case of Nutanix, for instance, getting the networking out of the way was according to the trends, because compute and storage speeds were increasing tremendously, but networking is not. So getting them out of the way was very aligned with the trends. And another trend was simplicity and manageability. So these were all very strong trends that made this filter a green for Nutanix. And same went for my company Cohesity. Next one is there a sufficient barrier to entry? Let me tell you that patents are not sufficient barrier to entry. One of my playbook is to have a 1 to 2 year lead, right? Even if a competitor tries to copy you, the product is complex enough. It will take you more than a year, preferably 2 years, to copy. And by that time, you will build more on the vision, right? Your vision is larger than the MVP, so you can maintain that lead. So is there a sufficient barrier of entry? Sometimes the barrier to entry might be stickiness, right? If you go to eBay, once every seller and buyer is on eBay, there is little incentive to do auctions elsewhere, right? So these are the barrier to entry. You need to make sure there is a barrier. In my company's cases, it's the complexity of the product that was the barrier. It was very hard to build web scale systems. So this filter was a green for us. Next one is, how long does it take to get to $100 million? So ideally, it should be within 5 to 7 years, right? Why $100 million? Because once you are generating $100 million in revenue per year, you're a unicorn, right? You apply a factor of 10 to revenue to become a unicorn. And again, you have to estimate looking forward how long it's going to take to generate $100 million. And you do that estimation by comparing yourself to other products in the space, how much they sell for, how much you're going to start selling, and how you're going to grow. You have to make that estimation. And ideally, it should be once you launch the company, once you launch your MVP, within 5 to 7 years, you should get there. If not, the VCs are not going to be interested. If it takes too long to generate $100 million, VCs are going to put the money in some other company, not in your company. And both my companies, Cohesity and Nutanix, we estimated it'll take us, 3 to 4 years, actually 5 years, but in reality, both of them took about 3, right? So this filter was a green for us. Next one, is it high touch or high volume? Because you can't be both. A high touch product is a product that requires a lot of customer hand holding, right? You're selling to an enterprise customer, perhaps. This is where my two companies fallen. A high volume product is a product like Google. Google makes a few cents every time you click on Google's ads, but then they make it on volume. And every time you're unhappy with Google search, you're not going to call Google and complain, right? So that's why Google can afford to make money through volume, but a company like Cohesity cannot afford to make money by volume. It has to reach that $100 million with very few customers, not millions of customers. And so we need to be able to charge more for our product. Right? A lot of time entrepreneurs come to me, and when I ask them how much you're going to sell the product for, they're like, $50 a seat or something like that. And they're like, how many seats are you going to sell in the first 4 or 5 years? And that doesn't add up to $100 million, right? So it's very clear that this is not going to be a unicorn. So if you are a high touch product, you ought to be able to sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And if you cannot sell that, then you do not have a unicorn. On the flip side, if you have a high volume product, then you can sell for much less than that, but then make up in volume, right? So you need to decide that upfront. We estimated, by the way, in Nutanix and Cohesity that we could sell for more than $200,000. So to reach $100 million, we needed about 500 customers. That's quite doable, right? And therefore we were agreeing. Next filter is the insertion point easy, right? Or is it a headache? Customers are not going to buy a headache, right? Let me give you an example. There's a company called Nimble Storage. They first tried to build a cache in front of an existing product, an existing storage product. And that's an additional headache. Not only are the customers managing that storage product, they are also going to manage that cache. And so even if they buy, it's going to have a shelf life. They're going to push that guy selling the storage product to, hey, build the cache yourself. Why do I have to go to another party to buy a cache? So this company, Nimble, had to pivot because their insertion point was not easy, right? So the insertion point has to be easy. In the case of my companies, we were eliminating a lot of headaches, both Cohesity and Nutanix. And so the insertion point was really easy. So this filter was a green. And last but not the least, what are the pivot points? Look, we can all drink our Kool-Aid. We think that our product is going to sell like hotcakes. But when we actually come to selling, that may not be the case. So you need to have a plan B and a plan C if the plan A doesn't work. For Nutanix, for instance, we initially, our plan A was to sell into VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, where people can host virtual desktops on the platform. But our plan B was to make it an analytics product, right? And plan C was to sell to service providers. Our plan A worked, so we never had to go to plan B or plan C. But those were the pivots that we had planned for architecturally, that we could go to, within 2-3 months if the plan A didn't work. And we even won an award for analytics, right? We in one of the VM World Conferences, we won an award on how fast we can run Hadoop on Nutanix. And people were scratching their head. What is this VDI company doing with analytics? And that's basically because it was architected into the product, should they ever need it. So these are the 10 filters. Let's move on to future planning. So I like to, so this tells us whether the company is viable or not, and we plan the company accordingly. Now, I like to build a monthly plan until the minimum viable product. And so I like to have Gantt charts for each function, for engineering, for product management, and more. And I like hiring plans for each quarter. I literally know every quarter since inception how much I'm going to hire and what type of people, especially the business hires. And then we need the financial plan, because we need to know when our money is going to run out and when we're going to raise A's, B's, and C's. And, we will plan our quarterly burn rate. So here is the plan for Nutanix, though no need to read through this. We will go through this in the execution section, right? Nutanix was founded in 2009, and here is the plan, at least a high-level plan. We'll go through that in execution. And here's the same one for Cohesity. So let's talk about execution, right? Like I said, I'll spend the least amount of time here. I'll say a few things about execution before I walk you through those plans. I like to review quarterly progress against the plan, how we are doing, because the plan might need course correction, right? Plans are plans. You miss plans, but you need to adjust them. But I always like to benchmark against the original plan. If I deviate too much, it kind of keeps me honest, brings a sense of urgency. So without further ado, let's talk about the plan of Nutanix. Let's step through it. So the first thing we wanted to do was prepare the proof of concept. Nutanix was founded in September 2009. We wanted to prepare a proof of concept by Feb 2010 and then raise the seed. Now, this was my first company. Clearly, I did not know that I could raise the seed before preparing the proof of concept. So this was green, right? We were able to raise seed. Some venture capitalists came in December 2009 and gave us seed money. So this was green. And then we wanted to be code complete by September 2010. And we missed on that by 3 months. We were code complete initially, right? For code complete for internal purposes, for doing quality assurance and stuff. We were only code complete by December 2010. And then we wanted to raise, you can think of this as somewhat of a prototype internally. And we wanted to raise our Series A by September 2010. And some VC came and preempted us. We know your reputations. We know you can build the product. You don't have to show us a proof of concept. I'll give you Series A. And so that was agreed. They gave us Series A much earlier in July. And now we are headed towards selling the product. But before we do that, we want to place the product for trials in the hands of customers, right? So we wanted to make an alpha product ready by January 2011, and we missed on that by 3 months. We were only able to do that by April 2011. So we missed on that by 3 months. And then the customers gave it a spin. They gave us some feedback, and that allowed us, next to launch the product, say that we're ready to sell the product. And we planned that for April, but we've barely given the alpha product to customers in April, right? We were delayed. So clearly we're going to be delayed, launching the company. So sure enough, we were 3 months late. We launched it in July 2011. And then we wanted to raise Series B to refine the product, to make it repeatably sellable. And we wanted to do that, by September 2011. We got preempted. Sorry. VC firm came and gave us the Series B much earlier, by July. And finally, we wanted to take it towards repeatability by December, and we missed on that by at least 3 months. So, in the big scheme of things, this is a multi-year plan. Yes, we missed by a few months, but the bigger point is if we did not have a plan, we would have missed by a whole lot more, right? Maybe a few years. That's really the point. It's not the point that we missed by a couple of months. And so, literally in actual execution by summer of 2012, we knew that we were firmly in the bowling alley, right, in that blue segment. And by 2013, we knew that we were riding the tornado. And eventually the company went IPO in 2016. And today it's valued at about $6+ billion, right? So that's the story behind Nutanix. In the interest of time, I will not go through the story on Cohesity. It's a similar plan. And again, the plan, we missed it. You can see the last step of the plan. The company was founded in 2013. I built a multi-year plan. The last step of the plan was supposed to be done by December 2016, and in reality took me 6 more months. So again, a multi-year plan literally spanning over 4 years. We missed by 6 months, but again, the idea is that if we didn't have this plan, we would have missed by a lot more. And we raised a funding round in early 2018 that made us a unicorn. SoftBank was the lead investor in 2018, and that made us a unicorn. And we've enjoyed our unicorn status since then. So I'll summarize. Success in startups is not all about luck. My contention is that luck comes to those who understand this journey, who plan for it, and then they know how to execute that plan. So thank you so much for listening to me, and apologies again for being late, but thankfully I was able to manage it all within the time. So I'll take some questions now. Any questions?
Thanks a lot, Mohit. Yeah, really enjoyed the talk, and thank you also for taking out the time. I know it's very late at your place, so let's take questions. Questions from the audience? Yes. Can you come here and talk? Yeah. Yeah, just stand here and speak. Please.
Hi, my name is Ranjit. I'm a computer science student in IIT Jammu, just in case you have a job in any of your company. So I have 2 questions if the time permits. One is, did the pain points change over time, or was it like stable from the start, or like when you started Cohesity and Nutanix? And second one is, why did you start Cohesity when you already had a unicorn in the beginning? Like when your hands were already full. Like what made you start another company? like these
All
things.
right.
Thank you.
So remember, I said that even while building the product, you need to get continuous feedback from customers. So the pain points were very solid. Um, Now, over time, you may discover more pain points as you continue to get feedback and as the markets evolve. But the very first few pain points you address, they better be very solid. If they're not solid, you're not going to be successful. You can't keep, morphing your product to suit different goalposts. Your goalposts cannot be moving. So you're always addressing, very well-defined pain points. And even if people are surprised, sometimes people join my companies and they see my initial talk. They're surprised that what even the problems they're addressing today are problems I foresaw like 9 years back. So the pain points were pretty solid. They better not change. If they do, then you need to pivot, right? That's why you define your pivot. So you actually have multiple pain points in mind, just in case the first one was not quite the real one and people are not willing to buy enough. Then you um, you know um, pivot to a different pain point, a different entry point in the market. Then that's how you take out. Or if the first one works, then as you iterate on the vision, right? Remember, your MVP addresses the first pain point, but the future iterations of your product can perhaps address the other pain points you found. But the pain points better be pretty solid. If they are moving goalposts, then you will not be able to do the company. Now, to answer your second question, I have a passion for doing companies. I don't quite do companies for money. If money was the important part, then I could retire after Google. I spent 5 years at Google helping build what is called the Google file system. Right, I was the 600th employee at Google. If I was into this for money, then I would retire right after Google. But I do this for my passion, and 3.5 years into building my first company, Nutanix, I found, roughly Nutanix. If you map the world of data into an iceberg, Nutanix addresses the tip of the iceberg, right? Which is the production stuff, and then there was a large part of the iceberg that still remained to be addressed. That was the lower part of the iceberg, right? The tip of the iceberg is, you can call it primary data, and the lower part of the iceberg is the secondary data. And I was passionate enough to see that there is an even bigger problem lurking beneath the surface of water in the iceberg. And so that led me to form my second company, Cohesity. And you cannot do, both companies in under the umbrella of one company. Both the ideas cannot be pursued. They're independently big ideas, and so that's some of the history that came about, right? So that's why. But anyway, good questions. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you, Mohit. One more, I guess I can ask a question. I mean, most of the audience here is very young. So, I mean, how did what experiences led you to identifying the first pain point, for the Nutanix? Was it the Google experience? Was it a PhD? And I mean, as a follow up to that, what would you advise the young people to kind of explore today so that they are also successful in identifying the right pain points?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start with how I noticed the pain point for Nutanix. I was at Google, and look, sometimes you make observations and it's not very clear to you right there that you can do a company on this. But then when you actually sit and think about the ideas to pursue for a company, then you look at your observations in the past few years and you realize something that clicks. So let me tell you the story behind Nutanix. This was I was at Google. I joined Google in 2003, and this was around 2005. Like I said, I was part of a team that built the Google file system. It was the first web scale file system in the world, and Google had to build that because Google would have otherwise have to buy storage from other vendors, and that would be incredibly expensive. So Google built a web scale file system, but they started using it initially like a traditional storage vendor, right? So they put the web scale file system, or all the servers that implemented the web scale file system, on on one side, and then they put their compute on the other side, and they connected that with some expensive networking. And this was Google's way of running their application. And very soon they found that they were spending a lot of effort trying to tune the network. The network speeds were a bottleneck. And so Google came up with an idea that why don't we merge the two sides, right? Why don't we bring compute and storage together? So in Google's terms, Google, everything runs in Linux. So they ran the Google file system processes on Linux, as well as their compute processes, which at the time did MapReduces or what have you, right? And so this was Google's crude way of doing hyperconvergence, which worked for Google, right? Because Google is its own customer, but it would not have worked for the real world, because in the real world, the storage and the compute don't trust each other, right? They're independent industries. And so when 4 years later, after I joined Google, or 5 years later, right, when I started my company Nutanix in 2009, I thought about that problem. Like, if that was a problem for Google, it should also be a problem for the real world out there. So how do I bring compute and storage together? And how do I solve this problem that compute and storage don't trust each other? And the answer to that was virtualization. Use virtualization to put a virtual boundary between compute and storage. So the storage stuff can run on a VM and the compute stuff can run on a VM, and they're separated safely through virtualization, right? So that was how we connected the dots, and that's how Nutanix was formed, right? And a similar story behind Cohesity. I think I was at Nutanix at the time. People were actually, our customers were not backing up a Nutanix, and that had me wonder why. Found that backups were very complex. So I knew there was a problem there to be solved. But it's never a great idea to jump on the first problem that seems visible, just like what I did at Nutanix. Maybe there's a bigger thing here. So I divided up the world of data into this primary data, which was the tip of the iceberg, which is what Nutanix was doing, and then the rest into second data. And the idea was, how about we build one platform that could consolidate all of secondary data, right? Bringing all of it together on one platform. That would not only solve the backup problem, which is people had to go to 3 different vendors or 5 different vendors to build a backup platform, but also do way more. It could bring test and dev on the same platform, analytics on the same platform. It could take you to the cloud. That's kind of how Cohesity was born. But the way, my advice to entrepreneurs would be, if you are building a company, don't be in a hurry to jump on the first idea that you see. I would rather start, let's say, let's start with the segments of the market where you can do a company, where you feel proficient. For instance, you may start with the big data segment, or the security segment, right? Or the data segment, or something like that, or the gaming segment, whatever your proficiency is. And then study every company that got funded in that segment in the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years, right? Why did that company get funded? What was behind that company? Remember, VCs do a lot of due diligence before they fund. So those companies must be addressing some real idea, some real problem, for the VC to be interested in funding the company. So if you study all those companies and what they're doing, then you will also start seeing trends, and you also start seeing gaps that will appear in the future because of those trends. And then you can map that to your observations from the past and figure out what to do. I did the exact same thing when I did Cohesity. I actually, yes, I knew about some of this stuff, that backups is a problem, but I did not jump on that right away. I looked at every segment that I could do a company in. At the time, it was big data, security, a number of different segments. I studied for all the companies that got funded in the last 3 years. We actually had a small group of people who used to come, and we would give assignments to them. They would study a company, give a presentation, right? Every day we would have a session like that. And we did that for a couple of months. And by the end of that, we started getting a pretty good idea of what the problems are going to be in the future. Remember, it's not the problems of today that matter. Somebody's probably already trying to solve them. It's the problems of tomorrow that are important. and you figure that out with this exercise. So that's what I would advocate that you guys do. And then as you find those gaps, then you can map some of those gaps to your observations from the past, perhaps, and then think of doing a company. But even there, it's not enough. You have to then get continuous feedback from customers. You have to go to them and ask, hey, if I build a product like this, would you buy? Is this of interest to you? Right? So this is the process that you have. It's a complicated process. People don't realize how hard it is to do the setting right. And my goal here in the presentation I did today was to tell you some of that stuff, right? So that you all can be successful in doing a unicorn one day.
Yeah, thanks, Mohit, for that. So I have a question. So some of us here are academics, and some of the students here might be wondering if they should do a PhD. So I was wondering if your academic training, since you have seen both the worlds, did your academic training help in some ways, and did it get in your way in some ways when you did your startup? Thanks.
So great question. Believe it or not, I had the same question, whether to do a PhD or not. But I will tell you, as I stand today, that I gained an incredible amount through my PhD. Now, let's define what a PhD does. Yes, you do the PhD in some area, right? Yes, you at the end of your PhD, you likely will become a big expert in that area. But that's really not why you do a PhD, right? You do a PhD to learn how to learn, or rather, let me state it this way. Before doing a PhD, you whatever knowledge you have acquired, you've acquired is generated by someone else. Somebody else writes a book or a paper, and you just read it and you acquire knowledge that way. A PhD teaches you how to generate knowledge, right? How to invent new things, and that is incredibly useful. There's literally a quantum jump in your mental elevation once you know how to generate knowledge, not just to acquire knowledge. And companies are all about generating new innovation, new things, right? This has never been, it looks easy in hindsight.
Mohit, you're not audible. I don't know if it's a problem at our end or is it
sorry,
suddenly
can you not hear me? Sorry. Hello? Hello? What happened? Can you guys hear me?
Oh, he's audible in Teams. Why is there issue?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yeah, I changed my mic. When did you guys lose me?
This quantum jump in mental elevation.
Yeah. Okay. So good. So I was saying that literally a PhD, a good PhD. Look, there are also bad PhDs, right? You need to do a good PhD, which means that you need to do it under a good advisor. And if you do that, it can be very rewarding. I was trying to tell you that a PhD, more than the subject that you do a PhD on, it's more about learning how to generate new knowledge. So far in your student life, you have learned how to acquire knowledge, but that knowledge was generated by someone else. As part of the PhD, you learn how to generate new knowledge. And very frankly, entrepreneurship is all about generating new things that have never been done before, right? That's what an innovative company does. It all looks cool and easy in hindsight. But imagine the world of an entrepreneur who did not have the benefit of that hindsight, right? They're generating something that has never been generated before, that has never been done before. And that is where the PhD really helps, even if you don't want to pursue an academic career, a research career. So yes, my PhD has really helped in bringing the clarity of thinking to me as I think about these companies, right? Very honestly, the data space is a very, it's not a new space. It's a space where tons of companies exist, and it's a industry that's been around for 30 plus years. And people often question, how come you're able to come up with stuff that not only no one has thought before, but people thought that this is a saturated market, no new ideas left. And it's really the ability to kind of generate new knowledge. And that comes from my PhD. So that's how I would answer that. So
thanks a
so
lot for that answer.
If you do have the patience to do a PhD, I would strongly recommend it. It helps you a lot later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Yes, please. Could you come here? Yeah, please.
Hello, hi Mohit. Am I audible?
Yeah, you need to speak a lot louder.
Yeah, I just want to know, like, a lot of ideas came in my mind. How did you find out that this idea can be the million dollar idea? Like, when we do the risk analysis, we find like all the ideas have the huge amount of risk, and mostly we drop the idea. So, what all factors are ki this idea can revolutionize the world? How did you find?
Yeah, so like take it through the 10 filters I had, right? I gave you those 10 filters. Take your idea through those 10 filters. And if they are all in the green, and be brutally honest with you, I've seen people, I give them the 10 filters, but they're not being brutally honest, right? I'll give you one example. I told you one of the filters is how big is the neighborhood. I'm sorry, how big is the market, the truly addressable market. So I had a person who came to me, they had some idea in the desktop space. And I'm like, how big is the truly addressable market? And they added the market capitalizations of all the companies that are doing anything in the desktop space. He added the market capitalizations of Microsoft and Intel and Apple. And I'm like, dude, that's not your truly addressable market. You're not, when you have your product, you're not going to displace Microsoft and Intel and Apple. You're not building a product that even competes with them. You need to look at your niche, right? And then imagine you are incredibly successful and you're able to kill all competition in your niche, whatever that niche is. And you need to then add the market caps of those companies to come up with the truly addressable market, right? And if that is more than $5 billion, then you have met the filter. So basically, you need to be brutally honest with those filters and not wing it. That this is where entrepreneurs sometimes they want to, almost believe that all the filters are green. They don't want to actually ask the hard questions. But if you do ask the hard questions, you will get real answers. And if all the filters are in the green, then probably you have, again, it's never a 0 or a 1, right? It doesn't make it a 1, but it moves it pretty darn close to a 1, that the probability of success of building a multi-million-dollar company here, possibly a unicorn.
And what are your vision regarding your both the companies? Like, you will expand in terms of product and services, or you will try some new domain also, like some other problem?
Yeah, so far I'm very committed to my current company. I think there's a lot of future potential, so that excites me. There's a lot of innovation again, and I'm a technologist, right? So I listed my title as the founder and CEO. I was until recently the CEO. 3 months back, I decided that I'll focus more on the technology front. I'm a technologist, so we brought in a great guy to run the company as the CEO. So I'm actually not the CEO anymore. I've taken on more a technical role. I'm the chief technology and product officer of the company. So my goal right now is to keep rolling up my sleeves and build on the innovation and technology. So that's my passion. That's what I do. Whether I do it in this company or another one, but I don't have right now thoughts about starting another one. Maybe one day, but not right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Mohit, I have one last question. You did your undergraduate in this department, Computer Science Engineering, IIT Delhi, and these students that we have today, they are actually visiting us for the first time, and this is probably the first talk that they heard in IIT Delhi. So and you have donated, and I want to say that this is this is based on the donation that you have given our department. So do you want to say some words about your association with the department and anything?
Yeah, I would say I would start by saying that I have a lot of nostalgia about the department. I'll start by saying this, that look, guys, how about I tell you the very first time I went in front of Sequoia, right? Sequoia is known to be the world's best early stage investor. I listed, my degrees from other universities, and Sequoia was like, Mohit, your other universities are fine, but what we really like is the IIT on your on your resume. We really like people from IITs, right? So even more than the university where I did my PhD, they actually respected me because I was an IITian, right? So that's the kind of respect even top venture capitalists in the world have for IIT, and so my association with the fact that I did my bachelor's from IIT Delhi is a large part of what defines me even now, right? And you'll find that even a few days back, I was in a gathering where people were very proudly talking about their JEE ranks. And these are people who are in their 50s and 60s, by the way. So that's how we get defined by IIT and the department where we did our bachelor's. I'm very fond of our computer science department. I gave a donation to them a few years back, so kind of giving back, right, to a department that has given me so much, and also so many of my batchmates. Maybe my batchmates, some of them are not in the same fortunate position as some of the rest of us. So the rest of us do owe it to the department and give something back for the new generation like yourself, right? So that you guys can also carry the torch that we started. I can tell you, in my time, I think we were the first few in the world from IITs to do companies, and now it's thrilling to see every year so many great companies are done by IITians. I think IIT Delhi ranks one of the top ones for doing companies. So we want you guys to carry the torch and give some back to the department that has made you what you are, right? So that's my association, and that's how I feel about the department and IIT in general.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mohit. So thank you once again. Let's thank our speaker and thank you so much for taking out the time. I know it's very late on a Sunday evening, so thanks, Mohit, and yeah, thank you.
All right, guys. Have a good day. And one more time, I don't usually do this, but my apologies for being 30 minutes late. I'm never late normally. I just got stuck somewhere.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.